Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my rest of season rankings for the 2022 fantasy football season. Now, as you can see immediately to the right of me, we have my rest of season rankings for a half PPR scoring format, meaning everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a standard league or a full PPR league. So we have our top 36 running backs, wide receivers, and our top 16 quarterbacks and tight ends for the rest of the 2022 season. Now, these rankings are all under the assumption that these players stay healthy for the remainder of the season. Now, some of these players are currently dealing with pre-existing injuries. For example, James Conner with his ribs, Damian Harris with his hamstring. There are other players potentially on the injured reserve like Cordero Patterson. Going forward, this has all been taken into account, but hopefully the assumption is that the rest of these players stay healthy for the remainder of the 2022 season, which obviously is wishful thinking, but most likely will not take place. That all being said, I've taken that into consideration along with what have these players done for us lately, who I expect to see continue that success or potentially improve going into the future, while also expecting some declines from other fantasy prospects. We've taken that into consideration along with the rest of season strength of schedule, and we have our rankings for you today here on screen. Now, as we progress throughout today's video, I could talk about every single one of these players for 10 minutes straight and probably tell you that I didn't talk about them enough. I really could. So we're going to go ahead and try to keep this short and sweet. Now, for those of you who want to hear my extended thoughts regarding these players, we'll be live streaming tonight after the Thursday night football game between the Washington Commanders and Chicago Bears. We'll be live streaming here on the channel, so if you haven't yet already, be sure to subscribe. Of course, we'll be probably live streaming for 2 hours and kind of giving you guys a little bit more information as to why I've ranked the players as such. This does give you a little bit more indication as to where I would go in terms of future trades, which players I want to go after and put on my roster for the rest of the season, which is going to potentially help us capture a 2022 fantasy football championship. So for those of you who are available after tonight's game, be sure to drop on by, ask some questions, get some questions answered. Thank you very much. Now, before you join us for tonight's live stream, for those of you who are trying to get more fantasy football in your system and have daily fantasy at your fingertips, PrizePicks is the way to do it. For those of you who haven't checked them out already, you can go ahead, travel to the description of the video and click on that link. When you travel to PrizePicks and make a first-time deposit using promo code Andrew, you'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. So for those of you who are interested, be sure to do that. Again, tonight, I'm pretty interested in this matchup, specifically in the context of one Carson Wentz and Curtis Samuel. Via PrizePicks, as of tonight, their numbers in terms of passing yards for Carson Wentz is 218.5. I'm certainly of the opinion that he's going to be able to surpass that number. Therefore, I'm picking more via PrizePicks. And as for Curtis Samuel, if we're going to anticipate to see Carson Wentz, of course, throw the ball a heavy amount of times like he has done all season long thus far, already 3 games of 300 plus yards this season, I'm expecting Curtis Samuel to continue his average. Thus far this season, Curtis Samuel has been averaging about 56 receiving yards per game. I think he can very easily surpass this number as he's done that 4 out of the last 5 contests that he has participated in. Therefore, I'm going more on his receiving yard total. Check that out. Go ahead, put together an entry, use promo code Andrew today via PrizePicks. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into talking about our rest of season rankings for the 2022 fantasy football season. Of course, you can see them all on screen right now, but let's go ahead and get a little bit of a deeper look. Of course, like I mentioned, I could talk about all of these running backs for 20 minutes straight each. But unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. So I'll go ahead and give you a couple thoughts on some players. First and foremost, let's talk about Josh Jacobs and why I have him so high on this list. He's currently my number 9 running back for the rest of the season. Let's just put this into perspective. I mentioned this on Monday night's live stream after the Monday Night Football game in regards to Josh Jacobs always being a top 12 fantasy running back, and the only thing that has ever stopped him is injuries. I mean, you go back to 2019. From weeks 1 through 15, his rookie season out of Alabama, he was averaging 13.97 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. And prior to his injury, from weeks 1 through 15, he was the number 11 overall running back in fantasy. Of course, the injury took place. He missed the rest of the season, therefore got knocked out of the top 12 standing. But he was prior to the injury. Now, going into his 2020 season, the sophomore year, was averaging 14.32 fantasy points per game, did not sustain an injury, and actually finished as the number 8 overall running back in that given season. You go to 2021, from weeks 1 through 3, was dealing with a turf toe. After that injury had pretty much ran its course, he had gone ahead and from weeks 4 through 18, presented incredible upside as he was the number 7 overall running back throughout that span of time, averaging 13.04 fantasy points per game. Now, thus far this season, what have we seen? We've seen him currently sustain as the number 4 overall running back in fantasy football in a half PPR scoring format. We all remember Josh McDaniels, the former offensive coordinator of the New England Patriots, now the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. From 2017 through 2021, the New England Patriots gave their running backs the most opportunities amongst all teams in the National Football League throughout that 5-year span. Opportunities meaning rushing attempts and targets. over the last 2 weeks, what have we seen? We've seen a boatload of opportunities, not only on the ground, but through the air. We've seen Josh Jacobs have 5+ receptions in each of the last 3 weeks. We didn't talk about him earlier this week because he's on a bye. But either way, this is another one of these players that going forward, if he's being given the full lion's share of this backfield, there's a lot of potential for a great season for Josh Jacobs ahead of us. Now, of course, there's some other players that I wanted to mention. Let's talk about, for example, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones. These are players that have not performed up to their normal standard. But then again, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. These are players that over the course of the last 3 years have been the best fantasy running backs and have continued to carry our fantasy teams. And yes, they haven't performed at the highest of levels throughout the first 5 weeks of the season. But there's a lot more time for these players to prove themselves once again to us. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and keeping them into this conversation of being RB1s going into the rest of the season. While they're followed by players like Dameon Pierce and Breece Hall, 2 up-and-coming rookie running backs that are obviously vying for that potential RB1 standing. If it wasn't for me giving these players the benefit of the doubt, of course, these rookies would potentially be ahead of them based on what they've already shown this season and what they're potentially going to look like for the rest of the way. That all being said, speaking of more rookies, we have Kenneth Walker at 21, Travis Etienne, who I consider a rookie, at number 22. There's a lot of players that going forward could have a lot of value for the rest of the season. We've gone ahead and balanced it out as such. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about the wide receiver position. Now, first and foremost, you anticipate seeing Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs. Those are currently the top 3 wide receivers in fantasy football. We anticipate to see them at the top. But as we continue to go down, we see names like CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown relatively high. Of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown, when he has been healthy and active for this team, the guy's been averaging 20 fantasy points per game. He's been doing that since the end of the 2021 year. And once he's healthy and fully back, I don't expect him to slow down. Now, I'm obviously not expecting this man to score a touchdown every single week like he has already shown over those, that 8-game streak that he presented to us. But I'm expecting him to be a major part of this offense and continue to be so, regardless of the fact that they will have Josh Reynolds getting more opportunity, TJ Hawkinson obviously having an explosive game recently. That all being mentioned, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the offense for this team outside of the running game. Now let's talk about CeeDee Lamb as our number 6 for the rest of the season. Once, in fact, we have the return of Dak Prescott, of course, we anticipate CeeDee Lamb to continue to be a top-tier wide receiver. Over the course of the last 4 weeks, he's been averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game with Cooper Rush. And he's been targeted 50 times already this season in the first 5 weeks. Those are the target counts that we were praying for this offseason. That was my number 1 gripe with CeeDee Lamb. Is he going to get enough opportunity within this offense? And as of thus far this season, it has presented itself, even without Dak Prescott under center. And once he returns, not only is the functionality of this offense and the effectiveness going to increase going forward, not only via the passing game, but also the running game, play action, but in combination with the kicking game and how well this defense has played, CeeDee Lamb is going to be in a fantastic position to succeed for the rest of the season. Of course, we have some other players on today's list. There's some players like Michael Thomas that we're not 100% certain on as to whether or not he's going to be healthy for the remainder of the season. We know that DeAndre Hopkins comes back. I have him as my number 23, as I do anticipate Marquise Hollywood-Brown potentially holding some sort of favor with Kyler Murray, considering their overall combination. But we'll talk about DeAndre Hopkins when we talk about Kyler a little bit later on in today's episode. Either way, giving you some perspective as some of the players I like going forward. Of course, Amari Cooper may not be considered in your eyes someone that we can trust as a top 18 prospect at the wide receiver position in a half PPR going forward. But once, in fact, we get to the territory of Deshaun Watson coming back and being the starting quarterback of this team, not only has the offense looked incredible this season, the defense has not played well, which will continue to push this team into passing the ball late and getting a lot of garbage time potential with Amari Cooper, who is one of the better wide receivers in the league and has already proven as such thus far this season. In the 3 games that he's had, 10 or more targets? Every single one of those games, he's scoring a touchdown, getting a boatload of yards, and being a fantasy-reliant wide receiver option. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the quarterbacks and tight ends for the remainder of the 2022 season. Now, as you anticipate, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, they're at the top of this list. But Kyler Murray thus far this season has performed a lot better than I truly, expected. Prior to the season beginning, I thought he was going to struggle far more without DeAndre Hopkins there. And the reason why I say this is because, it's apparent. He did struggle already with the absence of DeAndre Hopkins, as he's only been averaging just shy of 20 fantasy points per game. Now, if you go ahead and take into account from 2020 through 2021 with DeAndre Hopkins in the lineup, Kyler Murray in the 25 games that they have played together healthy averages 24.04 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. So there's obviously been a 4-point decline in terms of fantasy points per game, but I think once we get DeAndre Hopkins back into this lineup, Kyler Murray certainly has an opportunity to break into that top 5 category at the quarterback position. Now, of course, Tom Brady in the last 2 weeks has finally kind of gotten back to being himself. The first 3 weeks of the season really wasn't him, but as of late, throwing the ball a bunch and continuing to get his receivers, Mike Evans, of course, Leonard Fournette and Chris Godwin, the ball on a consistent rate. Now, Dak Prescott, of course, once in fact he returns, I expect him to be an extremely valuable fantasy prospect at the quarterback position. But then after that, of course, Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, those are the more reliable players at the position, while we have Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith. Those are players that, in my opinion, I don't know if we can technically trust. Carson Wentz truly does fill out the stat sheet. I mean, obviously, when he plays, he doesn't really help his team win, but he helps our fantasy teams win. I mean, you go back to last year, he was the number 13 overall quarterback in fantasy at the end of the season. Of course, Aaron Rodgers, as of late, pretty much been putting up like 16 points per week. Nothing incredible. Now, of course, we do expect a little bit of a decline from Jared Goff and Geno Smith because we don't know if their talent can sustain some of the matchups that they'll have to face going forward. But as of right now, this is where they sit. Now, when we follow up with Russell Wilson and Matthew Stafford, I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I'm not 100% certain that I can. Of course, Wilson dealing with a shoulder injury. Of course, Matthew Stafford dealing with that elbow. Both of them not playing well and turning over the ball at an extended rate. Now, let's go over and let's talk about the tight end position. Of course, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, those are the expected at the top, but Dallas Goedert has been incredible thus far this season, extremely consistent, which at the tight end position is, of course, rare, followed by Tyler Higbee. Tyler Higbee has been the biggest surprise for me at the tight end position. The fact that he currently leads the tight end position in total targets. He has 48 targets in 5 games. Not only that, he is tied with Travis Kelce on total tight end receptions this year with 33. The only difference between Travis Kelce and Tyler Higbee this year, besides the targets, receptions, pretty much leaning in the direction of Tyler Higbee, has been touchdowns. Of course, Travis Kelce has 7 receiving touchdowns, while Mark Andrews has 4, and Tyler Higbee only has, 0. That is unfortunately, the fact of the matter. But as of right now, the consistency that he has been producing with, via the receptions, via the targets, via the receiving yards, that is all we can ask for. And with that level of consistency, eventually he's going to find the end zone. And once, in fact, he does, of course, he's going to be a fantastic fantasy option. Now, when we continue on with Kittle, Ertz, Waller, these are players that I'm giving the benefit of the doubt. Waller and Kittle have done nothing this season for us. George Kittle was dealing with an injury early this season, but going forward, I expect these guys, like they have shown over the course of the last 3 years, to be some of the better tight ends in the National Football League on teams that want to utilize their tight end position. Now, as for Zach Ertz, why he's kind of lumped into this category, it's mainly because once DeAndre Hopkins comes back, he's going to see a little bit of a dip in terms of total targets, but I think those targets that typically would go to him are going to be siphoned away from Rondale Moore and whoever plays that slot position and are going to still go in the direction of Zach Ertz. I'm expecting him to continue to be a valuable fantasy asset. As for David Njoku, Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson, these are players that we're not 100% certain on. Of course, they could end up having great weeks, but they could also disappear and it wouldn't surprise us. Outside, truly, of this top 5 or 6, it's tough to trust these tight ends going forward. Now, of course, we've gone ahead and added our number 13, Taysom Hill, mainly off the idea that Taysom Hill probably will get opportunities going forward. As to whether they're the weeks that we expect him to be in, that is to be seen. But as of right now, there's always the potential that he could show up in a given week randomly and put up 15 plus fantasy points. And currently, and based on the way that the current tight end position is scoring on a weekly basis, a couple weeks of 15 is going to be able to catch up to guys like Gerald Everett, who will put up 2, 4, 8, and then maybe eventually have a 12-point week and then go back to being a 2-point tight end. These are the unfortunate realities of the position, and that's why he sits there. All right, that's pretty much going to cover it for today. Again, these are my rest of season rankings for the running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end positions for a half PPR scoring format, 4-point per passing touchdown format. Again, be sure to join us later tonight after the Thursday Night Football game between the Commanders and the Bears. Of course, join us as we'll be talking about some of these players and answering your questions via the live stream. Again, be sure to subscribe. We are very close to reaching our goal of 70,000 subscribers. So if you have yet to do so, be sure to go ahead, do us a favor, do yourself a favor as we're trying to help you win a 2022 Fantasy Football Championship this year with the videos that we continue to put out on a daily basis. All right, that's going to cover it for today's video. Of course, if you want to continue to stay playing fantasy football, even if you don't have anybody going tonight, be sure to check out PrizePicks. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have Carson Wentz and we have Curtis Samuel. We're taking more on both of their current statistical categories. Put together an entry. Use promo code Andrew when you make that first-time deposit because you'll be given a first deposit match up to $100. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.